everyone, it's Abigail again with another story for you. This one is also by Patricia St, and it's called The White Handkerchief. The man sat on the sidewalk beside the bus stop and stared at the stones. A few people turned to look at him, his unshaven face, his slumped shoulders, and his dirty shoes. But he wasn't aware of their glances because he was reliving his life. He was no longer a hungry beggar who had slept last night under a railway arch. He was a boy who lived in a small red brick house up the next street more than 20 years ago. Perhaps they'd bulldozed over that house by now. He hoped they hadn't crushed the pansies. It was strange how well he could remember the pansies, and the swing his dad made for him, and the path where he'd learned to ride a bike. Oh, how long they'd saved to get him that bike. The man shrugged impatiently, for the brightness of those pictures hurt him, and his memory traveled on another 10 years. The bike had been exchanged for a motorcycle, and he had begun to come home less often. He had a job by then and lots of friends. Mom and Dad seemed a bit sad and gray, and the bars were a lot more fun. He did not really want to remember those years, nor the day when the debts had piled up and he had gone home meaning to ask for some money. But they'd made him a cup of tea, and he didn't want to mention the money. So when they went out for a walk, he knew where his dad kept the money, and he went and helped himself to what he wanted. That was the last time he'd seen them. He had not wanted to go home again after that, and they had lost track of him. He'd gone away, and they knew nothing about the years of wandering or the prison sentence. But locked in his cell at night, he had thought a lot about them. Sometimes when he tossed awake and the moonlight moved across the wall, he used to wonder, once free, he would love to see them again, if they were still alive, and supposing they wanted to see him. When his time was up, he found a job in the town, but he couldn't settle down. Something seemed to be drawing him home, with an urge he couldn't get away from. Every time he went for a walk, something reminded him. A clump of pansies, a child on a swing, a little boy running home from school. Oh, he could remember running home to that small red brick house. He could have arrived earlier, but 20 miles away he was suddenly overcome with misgivings. What right had he to walk in like this? Could they ever reconcile this worn, weary man that he had become with the boy they had loved who had so bitterly disappointed them? He brought some food and spent most of that day sitting under a tree. The letter he posted that night was quite short. It had taken him hours to write, though. It ended with these words. I know it's unreasonable of me to suppose you'd want to see me, so it's up to you. I'll come to the end of the road early Thursday morning, and if you want me home, just hang a white handkerchief in the window of my old bedroom. If it's there, I'll come. If not, I'll just wave goodbye to the old house and be on my way. And now it was Thursday morning. He had arrived at the end of the street. It was still there, but having got there, he felt in no hurry at all. He just sat on the road and stared. Well, he couldn't put it off forever. And after all, they might have moved. If the handkerchief was not there, he'd make a few inquiries before actually leaving town. He had not yet had the courage to face what he'd do if they were there and simply didn't want to see him. The street was still in shadow. Shivering a little, he walked slowly toward the old oak tree where he knew he could see the old house as clear as clear. He wouldn't look till he got there. He stood under the branches with his eyes shut for a minute. Then he drew in a long breath and looked, and stood staring. The sun was already shining on the little red brick house, but it no longer seemed to be a little red brick house, for every wall was festooned with white. Every window was hung with sheets and pillowcases and towels and tablecloths and handkerchiefs and table napkins. White muslin curtains streamed across the roof from the open attic windows. It looked like a snow house gleaming in the morning light. His parents were taking no risks. The man threw back his head and gave a sigh of relief. Then he ran up the street and straight in at the open front door. In Psalm 103, it says, "As a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. For he knows our frame. He remembers that we are dust." And in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 15, the parable of the prodigal son, in chapter 15, verse 18, it says this: "The son said, 'I will arise and go to my father, and I'll say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me one of your servants.' And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, the father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him." This is good news. I hope you have a blessed and a joyful day. We have a loving Father.